I became involved in civil society.
Now, Ms. Hogan, can we return to the time period where you were now working with the ANC in South Africa, underground, and you mentioned in paragraph 12 of your affidavit that you were given a broad mandate to work within the white left. Can you explain to the court what this broad mandate was and what it entailed?
Lord, as I've said before, there was skepticism, not skepticism, but apprehension and ignorance about the ANC in some of the circles that I moved in. And part of my mandate by the ANC was to persuade the white left, and as it happened in later years, whilst I was in prison, to persuade a broader section of the white community that the principles and values of the ANC, as elucidated in the Freedom Charter, were really the blueprint for taking the country forward. And particularly amongst white left activists, to persuade that community of people that affiliating themselves to the values and principles of the ANC was a logical step that we needed to take to go forward. And that the ANC itself needed support from wherever it could get that support.
Thank you. You also indicated that you felt it was important to keep the ANC apprised as to what was going on in South Africa, in particular because of the influx of people who had joined the movement post-1976. Can you elaborate?
Well, to be quite frank, when I joined the ANC, it was in 1977. It was when the ANC itself in exile was undergoing a process of radical renewal, as it were, because young people were leaving the country in droves post the uprisings. And the ANC was now having to formulate how to look after these people, what role they were going to play. And so the ANC itself was facing its own challenges in exile around that time. So when I joined, it was clear to me, and it didn't put me off, but it was clear to me that the ANC was uncertain, because I think I was one of the early white people to join from internally, uncertain how to deploy me properly. And so I just continued with my political work inside the country, but kept touch and a base. Every now and again I'd go through to Swaziland, debrief them. And it came to my attention that some of the understandings that ANC people had about what was happening internally came from quite dated information. And I thought it very important that the ANC be kept up to date as best as possible about the political trends and thinking within the country, because they were increasingly playing a leadership role from exile. And I thought the better they understood the complexities of the political situation, the better for everyone. So that was my commitment to keeping the ANC in touch.
Ms. Hogan, you referred to this interesting term, under discipline. Perhaps you can advise the court, is this a term that you coined, or did it come from the ANC itself? And what exactly do you mean by under discipline?
It didn't, as I recall, and it's a time ago, it didn't come from the ANC per se. Amongst a small group of us, under discipline meant that you were prepared to submit yourself to the discipline of the ANC. So if the ANC said, we would like to discuss with you whether you should do this or that, and we would submit to those kind of discussions, or we want you to do that, and it wasn't problematic, we'd go ahead with it, so that you would be loyal and see yourself almost under instructions at certain time, under instruction from the ANC.
Right. Although, as you point out, you weren't actually receiving particular instruction,
exactly,
but rather working under their general and broad direction.
Yes, the commitment of joining the ANC was a commitment of saying, was a statement of belief, of saying that I believed the future of the country lay in the hands of the ANC. And if the ANC was of the view that they would want me to do certain things, and obviously if it didn't conflict, it wasn't just an ultimate, the ANC just giving orders and you follow, but that I would submit myself to the discipline of the ANC.
Thank you.
But in the early years, as I was saying, I think the ANC and myself were quite confused, because usually people joined Umkhonto weSizwe. I was in the anomalous position that I did not join Umkhonto weSizwe. I joined the political underground. Now, just allow me, it's not exactly in the thing. My Lord, the ANC based its strategy on the 4 pillars of struggle: underground work, mass mobilization, international work, and military work. Those were the four strategies that the ANC adopted. And when you joined the ANC, you understood that those were the 4 pillars of struggle. Obviously, the most developed 2 of those 4 for the ANC was the international struggle, and Oliver Tambo and Thabo Mbeki and all of those acquitted themselves incredibly well in the international field, and Umkhonto weSizwe. As regards mass mobilization, the ANC had played a secondary role to the black consciousness movement in the 70s. It was really the black consciousness movement that was doing the mass mobilization. The ANC could not do mass mobilization because it was banned. So that created the first level of complexity. The second level of complexity was the underground political work. What did that mean? And at the time that I had gone there, those issues had not been properly worked out, and I think that accounted for the slight confusion about how I should be deployed. In later years, the ANC, after meeting with the Vietnamese and whatever, sophisticated their understandings of what underground political work actually meant. But in those early years, and it finally resulted in Operation Vula, which was one of the most sophisticated attempts to organize a political underground under the command of the ANC. But at my time, those structures did not exist. So there was not any structure that you could join for political underground work, as per se. And that created the confusion. What do we do? Does she do work to support MK? What does she do?
Thank you. That's very helpful. You were in fact using a sort of secret or covert means of communication with certain individuals outside. Can you indicate to the court who you were communicating with, for what purpose, and perhaps the actual physical means of doing so?
I was transferred from the Swaziland command to Botswana, the forward area as it was called, and I was working with Marius Squirn and Jeanette Curtis. I'd known them in South Africa, and they were working in the ANC structures in exile. I was asked to set up a dead letter box. In other words, if anything I was to report, it would be in a document, I would leave it at a certain place. A courier from outside would pick it up and take it out. I would never meet the courier, and the courier would never meet me. At a later point, this was consolidated. I opened up a post box under a false name in Johannesburg, Unilever. I was taught how to encode documents using a book code. So anything I sent was done in code. I used to then place that report in the post box, and the courier had a duplicate key to that box. And I used to go there on a certain day. It was always specified between certain times, and the courier would go on the same day between certain times and pick it up and take it out.
Thank you. And to the box still available?
It's in over. Maybe I can go and check out.
Well, one would hope these days, Ms. Hogan, they could use modern technology to get messages to you. And typically the kinds of communications, would they be your analysis of what was taking place, reports of some nature?
I was very involved in support work at that time for the trade union movement, consumer boycotts, various community activities. I was involved in assisting certain trade unions, and I was sending reports around the trade union movement and developments there. There was some concern that that certain members in FASATU were taking quite a strong and hostile anti-ANC position during that period of time. So it was those kinds of reports. It was just information about the current political situation.
But when did you first get to know and meet Neil Aggett, Dr. Neil Aggett?
I can't remember when I first got to know him. I knew Gavin Anderson. I'd known Gavin Anderson for a long time. And I think I met Neil via Gavin Anderson.
Perhaps just indicate to the court who Gavin Anderson is.
Gavin Anderson worked in the Industrial Aid Society when I was there, and later became a full-time organizer for the Metal and Allied Workers Union. He was later banned and started a carpentry cooperative with Sipho Kubega, who was also very prominent in Mawu, who was also banned. And I worked in a rural consultancy that was linked to that cooperative. So I knew Gavin fairly well.
Thank you. And before I interrupted you, you were explaining how you got to know Neil Aggett.
I must have met him in the course of my friendship with Gavin, because Gavin knew Neil. I was more familiar with Liz. Liz and I were very good friends. Dr. Floyd was working in the Industrial Aid Society at the time, as was Neil Aggett. Now, there was a great concern within the Industrial Aid Society at that time that certain elements within FASATU were trying to control the Industrial Aid Society, and often that meant a very, very hostile anti-ANC stance. And so there were discussions amongst us who'd been related to the Industrial Aid Society, who were sympathetic to the ANC, about how that could be best managed without creating great schisms within the trade union movement. And I know that I had discussions with Neil and Gavin around those kinds of issues. It was really around those tactical and strategic issues that I got to know Neil.
And just to put the court in the picture, you mentioned that, if I remember correctly, FASATU and perhaps other unions were vehemently taking an anti-ANC stance. Why was that?
Let me not speak on behalf of some of those unions. It was always within FASATU and COSATU there were differences of opinions about the ANC. One of the major reasons put forward, and it has a lot of logic to it, by the people who were anti-ANC, was that we were trying to build a black trade union movement that represented the interests of black workers. We were building it in the teeth of a very hostile government who at that stage had not even acceded to the question of whether black trade unions should ever be recognized. The argument was that if these trade unions had any relationship to the ANC, the state could just simply ban them. And it was hazardous to have that kind of relationship. And there's a lot of merit in that argument. And it was part of what preoccupied my mind and a lot of our minds is what is the relationship between above-board organizations in the country that, yes, were hostile to the apartheid government. What was that relationship to the ANC? Because the ANC could jeopardize that relationship simply by associating with it. There was another reason. There were some who were more hardcore opposed. And they felt that SACTU, which had been the South African Congress of Trade Unions, which in previous years had been the trade union wing of the African National Congress when both were legal. The argument was that SACTU had actually forsook its organizing role more and more in favor of a political mobilization role. Later on, and I won't go into more, it became very complex and very academic, and young people like a lot of theory and academics and whatever. But later on, these differences of opinions morphed into two strains within the trade union movement. One was called the workerist, which believed that the only legitimate site of organization was on the factory floor, and the other one was called populist, which believed that you should engage, that a trade union had a responsibility to support community struggles and not only trade union battles on the shop floor. So the relationship between trade unions and political struggle in the country, not just political struggle in the ANC, but political struggle in the country, became a thing of that, especially after June 76, it was apparent to anybody that if any trade union did not build a comradely relationship between struggles in the schools, the universities, and communities, they could not be adequately representing their workers because their workers were affected what was happening in their community. And quite frankly, my view was that the majority of black activists out there in the communities were increasingly and undeniably supportive of the ANC. So those differences of opinion did emerge within our ranks and continued right through the UDF days.
Thank you. And can you recall whether Dr. Neil Aggett fell into one camp or the other?
Dr. Aggett spoke to me, and it was a conversation because everybody was in a dilemma. You know, you are sympathetic to what the ANC is trying to achieve. Where do you put yourself? I never disclosed to Dr. Aggett that I was a member of the ANC, as it were. But his view to me, he said, look, Barbara, I really, really do associate myself with what the Freedom Charter is trying to achieve. But I've got to be realistic. I'm a unionist. I am building on the shop floor. Any association with the ANC will jeopardize that position. So he took a position midway between these two kind of groups that emerged, one that was anti-ANC and one that was pro-community struggle and populism. His position was, I believe we should be fighting the apartheid government. Trade unions are not just simply there to deal with workers' grievances. There have to be a movement that is forged, that can be sufficiently strong enough to take on the apartheid state. But he says, in my personal capacity, in the work that I'm doing, I cannot be a member of the ANC. And any linkage to the ANC would be dangerous.
Thank you. Can I ask you to recall from your interactions with Dr. Aggett the kind of person he was, in your eyes, personality and character?
Dr. Aggett was, Neil was an incredibly calm, thoughtful person. His thinking was very clear. And he was not a person who would just submit to someone's way of seeing the world just to please him. He was an independent thinker, Neil was. But both he and Dr. Floyd were exceptional people, in my view, because both were doctors. I remember Dr. Floyd was working at Baragwanath, and sometimes she'd be working 48 hours non-stop.
Not Neil.
Neil was also working, he worked at Tembisa. I think he worked for a period at Baragwanath, I'm not sure, but both of them, young doctors at that stage, and even now, one knows, works incredibly long, hard hours. And Neil was in fact doing two things. He was doing trade union work and he was doing his medical work. And he was committed to both of them. He had an incredible commitment to the health of South Africans, and did not see himself becoming a doctor who worked in the suburbs and earned a good income. In his work in the Industrial Aid Society, he was continually engaging with the health issues of workers, how workmen's compensation, all of these kinds of issues. And so I was very admiring of both of them because of that utter commitment. It was admirable.
Thank you. In your affidavit, you mentioned that during the first half of 1981, and I should just point out that in paragraph 16 you said the first half of 1982, but I assume that's a typo. It should be 1981. You were asked by Mario Skirm and Jeanette, and they indicated that they wanted to meet Neil. Can you just describe what then unfolded?
I relayed that request to Gavin Anderson. Gavin and I had an occasion to talk about a matter that Jeanette and Marius had raised. It concerned the activities of a particular comrade who they were worried about. And Gavin and I did not share the views of Jeanette and Marius in exile. And I was delegated by Gavin to go and sort the matter out with Jeanette and Marius. He did not know that I was working for the ANC, that I was an ANC member. He just, because I was friendly with Jeanette and Marius, he thought I just picked up that information because of my friendship. I would visit them on occasion. So I thought the best vehicle to convey this would not be via me, convey this request from Neil, from Jeanette and Marius to meet with Neil. I felt it would be better if it came from Gavin, because he was firm that he was not working under the discipline of the ANC, and I thought if ever it came back that it was me that organized that meeting, I was a member of the ANC and I would jeopardize Neil. So I then conveyed it via Gavin. So that's a long way of putting it. But I just felt that I needed to put a distance between myself and Neil in terms of Jeanette's request. Neil did not go, and he was correct not to go.
I see. And in fact, you suggested in the affidavit that Gavin Anderson was reluctant to organize this meeting.
Gavin had in the past met with SABC structures very earlier on, in early years, and he had not continued, as I understand it, and he should speak for himself, he had continued not to want to engage with them. That's what he said to me. And I know that he felt that SACTU was out of touch with what was happening in the trade union movement. So he would not have been keen.
Then in paragraph 17, you indicate that you did have a conversation with Neil. And I'm not going to ask you to talk about that because you've already indicated to the court Neil's views as to why he would not want to associate with the ANC. But we can now turn to June 1981. You were saying in your affidavit that you were telephoned by someone who asked you to meet, somebody wanted to meet you at Jeanette Perrin's home in Norwood. Could you indicate what happened at that meeting?
I knew Jeanette Curtis Gwen's parents because I'd known Jeanette in the country, and I was asked to go to that house. I went to the house, and a courier was there from Botswana, and the courier told me that the person who had collected my report from the postbox had reported the dead letter box. The person who had collected my report, my last report, which I put into the dead letter box, that person reported that when he picked up, the top of the envelope was slit open like that. And that the ANC was of the view that my dead letter box had been intercepted and that I should leave the country as soon as possible. I asked how I should leave, and they said I should leave legally because they were of the view that whoever had intercepted the postbox did not yet know who I was, and that in the interest of haste I should leave immediately.
And you also indicate that after you left Jeanette's parents' home in Norwood, that you immediately came under surveillance. How did you pick that up?
It was quite uncanny. I was, as a matter of rule, you always look to see who was following you. But when I left Jeanette's house in Norwood, I started noticing that there were several cars following me. And you do these things, you go around a block and then you turn down that street and, you go round and round and eventually you detect who is following you. And it was more than ever had followed me before. It was about 6 cars that were following me.
She's obviously played many roles in the struggle against apartheid and in post-democratic South Africa. Barbara Hogan, mostly known as the former Minister of Public Enterprises today. There
was some other reason for this intense surveillance. It said to me that I did need to get out of the country fast because the forces were coming down upon me. So I went to my flat. Should I continue?
Yes, please continue.
So I went to my flat where I was staying. I wrote up a letter to my flatmate and I put some rental money in. She wasn't there. And I said, I'm going to have to leave for a while. I'm just going away for a while. And as I put it in the envelope, it slit open at the top. Yeah, I got a huge fright when that happened. And then I looked at all the envelopes, and envelopes at the top are folded over like that. And all of them had, the way they'd been printed, they had a fault along that line. And as you put something in it, it just folded open like that. So I then realized that my network had not been infiltrated, my correspondence had not been intercepted. But I had to deal with the fact that I was being intensively followed. So I didn't dare use my old communication system. And I went to Alan Fine, who was the only person I knew, who was a friend of mine. I went to Alan Fine because I knew he was in the same way as I was, communicating with, Alan Fine was communicating with Kasatu, at least with Jeanette and Marius in Botswana. And I sent a report via his encoded network to say, my dead letter box appears not to have been intercepted, I explained, but I'm under heavy surveillance. I cannot leave legally. What are your instructions? I couldn't leave legally because they would have just picked me up at the border, following me to the border. I got no answer whatsoever from the ANC. And I became very anxious.
So after not getting an answer in the time period you expected, what step did you take then?
Well, I kind of slowed down my political work. I didn't want to be even meeting with anyone because I thought I was contaminating. And I was realizing that I was now the danger to political networks that I was in. So I thought, well, now I've just got to get out of the country illegally. So I approached a person called Rob Adam, who had in previous years attempted to recruit me into Umkhonto we Sizwe. So I knew him to be a member of Umkhonto we Sizwe. I had declined to be recruited into Umkhonto we Sizwe, and I approached him and I asked if I could use MK Networks to get out of the country. And he agreed to discuss that with his handlers.
I see. And while you're talking about Rob Adam, you indicate that he had some kind of connection in relation to why you were being followed at that time.
Yes.
Perhaps you can just elaborate on that.
It came out in detention. In fact, Conrad spoke about it and several other people spoke about it. That the security police were interested in Rob Adam because his networks had been infiltrated. His Umkhonto we Sizwe networks had been infiltrated and they knew about him. And so they were following anybody who had contact with Rob Adam. He was at a point of wanting to dynamite the SABC tower, the communications tower. And so they had put him under intensive surveillance. But at the very same time, national intelligence had suddenly developed an interest in the white left and had started following me and several other people within the white left. National intelligence, separate from the security police. And that's the intelligence department who doesn't arrest anyone, they're just picking up on intelligence. And Major Conrad said there were moments when they nearly had fistfights in the street. Nearly had fistfights with each other. National intelligence and security police nearly had fistfights with each other in the street about who should be following me. And I saw that antagonism between national intelligence and the security police myself. There was a great deal of antagonism.
And you also indicated in your affidavit that Rob Adam had been visiting your flatmate.
Yes. Rob Adam had been a good friend of my flatmate. She didn't know that he was in Umkhonto we Sizwe. But because he was coming to the flat and I was in the flat, they were following both of us.
Right. And we can return to your evidence in relation to you approaching Rob Adam to seek assistance through the underground MK networks to leave the country. What then transpired?
Rob said that he would definitely look to speak to his handlers to see how they could get me out of the country in their networks. I had mentioned to Rob that I had received no answer from the ANC when I'd sent the report through about about my dilemma, and I had received no answer. And I had shared with Rob that I thought the Botswana network was quite heavily compromised because people were openly visiting Jeanette and Marius. All you needed to have was a security police placed near their house and they would see who was coming on. In fact, I was not compromised by it, but Jeanette and Marius had used a courier to pass messages on to a whole number of people within the country And that courier turned out to be a member of national intelligence. And I was not compromised by that, but others were. And I'd mentioned to Rob that I thought the Botswana network was very leaky and had compromised quite a few people.
And did you set all this information out in a report that Rob asked you to draw up about your activity?
Rob came back to me and he said that the ANC-MK had done a security assessment of my particular situation and that they agreed that at the moment I was not in immediate danger, but they wanted to organize that I move to a safe house in preparation for leaving the country. However, Rob said to me they were as deeply concerned about the security of the Botswana network as I was, and that the High Command in Mozambique had been delegated to do a security assessment of the Botswana operation. And they asked me if I would compile a report outlining what my fears were about the security operation of the Botswana network and just how unsatisfactory the relationship was. And here I go back, it's back to the initial thing I raised, my Lord, that trying to do political work in the country via an organization that is in exile in another country is a very complex matter because politics happen in the hour, every day. You can't be in touch all the time. You don't know if you're on the same line of thought as the people in exile, and it just became complex. So Rob asked me, because on behalf of the ANC, that I would do this report because there was going to be a high-level investigation about the problems in the Botswana network. And I was worried about the Botswana network compromising people. So I wrote such a report. But I never mentioned names. I wrote a report about what I was doing in the country, but I never mentioned names, and I never put in anything that could identify anyone.
What was the title of that report?
Problems arising, I think, problems arising in internal political work. Problems in internal political work.
Yes. That's set out in Lord in paragraph 24. But in fact, Rob came back to you and said that his handlers in the ANC needed more information. What was his further request?
Rob came back to me and said that thanked me for the report and sent it through, and that it had gone straight through to Mozambique. But he said, as a consequence of that report, there was a great deal of concern about the safety of the people that I was working with in the country. And they needed to know who they were, because if they were doing this high-level security assessment of the security of the Botswana network, they needed to know who the people were that I was working with. I asked if that report was going to be encoded, and he said no. That report will be out of the country within a matter of hours, and they need that report urgently because they were concerned about the safety of certain people.
So you duly compiled that handwritten report in quite a rush.
Yes.
In fact, how long did you spend on that report?
You know, I was under pressure to just produce a report quickly. I myself was still worried about it, and it's still something I wish I'd never ever written, because of the consequences that it's had, not only for Neil, but for everybody, and all the suffering that people went through. A lot of that was attributable to this report. I wrote it and sent it through because I was concerned about the security of these people. And I myself was in a dilemma.
Yes. And we will get to the terrible deception that you were under shortly. But if we can now focus on that report, which is titled Close Comrades, and Lord, that's the copy we handed up this morning, which is Exhibit B.3.5.21. I was hoping perhaps it would be helpful if you described how you organized this report, why you came up with certain categories, and explain to the court those categories and why you decided to place certain individuals in each category.
Okay. There are the first three in that report: Cedric de Beer, Gavin Anderson, and Aggett van Heerden. Those were three people, particularly Cedric and Aggett, that I used to meet with absolutely regularly. Each of us had different networks and different influences amongst different networks. And all of us were very deeply committed to the ANC. And they were my core primary group. Only I was linked to Botswana network, and I honestly, even to this day, don't know which ANC networks either Gavin or Aggett were linked to. But they spoke of instructions coming from this, or, comrades of the view of this. But I never knew who their networks were. I put them first because if anybody was going to be in danger, these were the three that I met with most regularly. And if I had been under surveillance or if the security had broken, they would be most affected. I also put them first because, my Lord, as you would recall, I earlier spoke about a matter that had arisen between ourselves in the country and Jeanette and Marius, which I was delegated to go and sort out with Jeanette and Marius. And so if that contact had been uncovered by the security police, they would have immediately have known that both Gavin and Aggett were part of that matter that happened in my relationship with Botswana. And I was concerned about Botswana because of the security matters, so these three had the latest contact with Botswana. But I primarily put them there because they were my closest political comrades. I then put Fink Haysom. He had always worked with those people, and he was coming to South Africa, to Johannesburg. And we were all four comrades who were committed to getting rid of the apartheid government and to the values and principles of the ANC. Then I added Alan Fine. Now, he was a separate category completely. Alan Fine and I were both very close friends with Jeanette and Marius. I happened to be visiting Jeanette and Marius. At the same time, Alan was there, and became aware, because of the loose security, that Alan was working under discipline in the same way that I was with Jeanette and Marius. Alan was a very good friend of mine. He was working in the trade union movement under Emma Mashinini in the Commercial Catering and Allied Workers Union. And Alan and I would often strategize together around trade union strategies and tactics and whatever, particularly as regards TAXA, which was a very tame trade union, and whatever. So he was the one person that I knew for a fact was working under discipline with Jeanette and Marius. And I was concerned about his safety because the message that I had sent to the ANC via his communications network apparently never appeared to have got to Botswana. Okay, so then the next group was just a group of people who I considered people who I would just consult with or reference group. And that was Neil Aggett, Liz Floyd, Merle Favis, Mohammed Vali Musa, Ishmael Mamunyat, and Monty Nasu. Now, those were people who I was strategizing with relating to trade union matters. I've spoken before about Neil's interest in health matters at IAS. Merle Favis was the editor of the South African Labour Bulletin. Mohammed Vali Musa and Ishmael Mamunyat were involved in in later years, but were part of a young generation of Indian activists who became the core group for the Transvaal Indian Congress. And Vali Musa later became the General Secretary of the United Democratic Front. And Monty Nasu, he was also working in the trade union movement. So these were people who, if I look back now, were people who I valued their opinions, valued their wisdom, their experience and their insight, and people whose opinions I would take very seriously. I wrote their names because I was meeting with them often. And if the surveillance was anything to go by, it might be that their relationship to me had been picked up.
Ms. Holmby, before you move on, next to the title Advisory Stroke Reference Group, we had in brackets only above ground work. What exactly did you mean by only above ground work?
That I never engaged with any of them about ANC work or I never recruited them into any ANC network. What we were engaged in were legitimate trade union and political mobilization work. Above board, the security police, it was like consumer boycotts in support of trade union work. It was a whole range of work that I was involved in that was, even though it was anti-government, it was still not illegal. And it was mobilization work and organizational work of a black working class.
And as far as you were aware at the time, these 6 individuals were not ANC members under ANC discipline?
Look, Neil I knew for sure was not a member because he had said to me, I'm not going to be a member. I had no idea if, and I'm really honest about this, I had no idea if any of these people had any relationship with the ANC. You know, one just didn't go and just say to people, hey, I'm working with Lesotho or Botswana or something like that. Because, you know, you would expose yourself and everybody else. That was not the kind of conversations one had in political work in the country. So I didn't know if any of them were linked to outside or not. Nor was I aware if all of them, what their positions were, because there were other movements abroad as well. There was a Trotskyite group linked to the group of 5 that were expelled from SACTU. I didn't know if any of these had any of those linkages. I really didn't know. Yeah.
And sorry to interrupt you, please continue with that.
Yes. So this was just a group that I just worked with in my daily work as a political organizer. Then there was a younger group. These were younger. These were activists who I referred to: Barbara Creasy, Barbara Klugman, Joanne Yarich, Morris Smithers, Neil Coleman, Jane Barrett. These were a younger generation of activists who, post-1976, had become very committed to organizing a black working class, to organizing in communities. Jane Barrett later on became a Secretary General of the Transport and General Workers Union. I mean, all of them in later years became very prominent in important political organization in the country. And so they looked to me almost as a reference mentor and would seek guidance from me on certain things. But because they met with me regularly, and Barbara Klugman was my flatmate, I thought I should write their names.
So Barbara Creasy was a flatmate?
Barbara Klugman.
Oh, Klugman, so.
Yes. There were 3 Barbaras in this game: Barbara Klugman, Barbara Hogan, and Barbara Creasy. And at one stage, Major Cronwright was screaming in the passageway, "There's too many damn Barbaras in this!" And it's always been of great value to all of us.
No doubt it's a badge of honor to have been a Barbara.
Absolutely. So, in short, these were the people who, in a quick moment, I thought could be potentially jeopardized by my network with Botswana because of my association with them.
And just to wrap this up, this last group, this group who you just consulted with, or rather you acted as their consultant, as far as you were aware, again, they were not ANC members or under ANC discipline?
No, they weren't.
So once
They
you-
might have been, but, you know,
to your knowledge at the time?
to my knowledge.
So Ms. Hogan, once you had handed over that list to Rod Adam, did he give you any particular advice?
He said to me that arrangements were being made about the safe house, that I should not refrain from doing political work because that would, if I did absent myself from work, that would give the security police an idea that I was on to the fact that they were monitoring me very closely. And so on that basis, I went down to the Eastern Cape to meet with the South African Allied Workers Union. And we were in the process of setting up a movement of unemployed people. When I came back from that visit to East London, I was arrested, I think, the following morning, in the early hours of the morning.
And just prior to your departure, had you received a communication from the ANC in Botswana?
Yes. I was very angered. Just prior to my leaving for East London, someone delivered, and I can't remember who it was, a letter from Marius to me, which I thought might have pertinence to, the issues that I've been raising with them, how do I get out the country and whatever. And it turned out to be a request that I speak to people in the white left to set up safe houses for Umkhonto Wesizwe soldiers. Now, I had specifically said to the ANC that as much as I sympathize with Umkhonto Wesizwe work, we cannot intertwine military work with political work, because then you will blow everything out of the water. And up to that point, and that was a point I'd made when I was recruited, that I was recruited for political underground work. And up to that point, my preference not to do military work had been respected. Then all of a sudden I get this document in the midst of all this heavy surveillance, requesting me to set up structures. It has passed my mind that perhaps that document did not come from Marius, in the light of later events, that perhaps that document came from the security police themselves, wanting to further entrap me in military work. In other words, this was a document that seemingly came from Marius. It was typed up. It wasn't in a handwriting, requesting me to approach members of the white left to set up safe houses for Umkhonto Wesizwe. If I had followed that instruction, I would have ensnared white left people in the military work of the ANC, and therefore any work that they did in the trade union structures, in community structures, in civics or whatever, would be jeopardized because of their immediate connection to the military underground. So I have often thought that it could have been the security police that sent that to me to further ensnare me. But I never followed up on that.
And how did you get to learn about this terrible deception that in fact your reports, the close comrades list, as well as the report titled Problems Arising in Political Work, were intercepted?
I was arrested about 3 o'clock on the morning of the 22nd of September. Major Cronwright, Warrant Officer Marks, I forget who the others were, came into my flat, incredibly aggressive, yelling, screaming, shouting, opening drawers, throwing things around, the usual story. And then both myself and Barbara Klukman, who I shared the flat with, were taken in separate cars to John Foster Square. In the car, Cronwright was boasting. And in the car he said, "So, we know about your close comrades." And I think he mentioned a couple of names. And I immediately knew that this document had arrived in his hands. And I therefore immediately assumed that my previous document, the one that I'd sent about problems in internal work, was also in their hands, and that both had been intercepted. And later on, there was no pretense. They would speak openly that they had intercepted, that they had infiltrated Robert Adams' network, and, you know, there was no pretense there.
Look, we are going to turn to Ms. Hogan's detention, but I'm just noticing the time that it is now after 11 a.m. and I was wondering if that would be an appropriate time for the theatre.
Yes, yeah, we'll take a 2 minutes break because we know that this is going to be
10 minutes.
We'll take it. You want to adjourn now?
My Lord, I'm happy to carry on, but I was just suggesting that this would be an appropriate time before we turn to her detention.
I'm happy.
Oh, I can proceed. Okay. You mentioned that it was Major Arthur Conrad who led the police raid on your flat on the 22nd of September 1981. You also indicate that it was Conrad who was leading these investigations. Can you describe Arthur Conrad as a person?
Major Conrad was an extremely angry, aggressive man. Not only towards detainees, his own staff called him Hitler. He had occasions when he'd just go berserk. And I mean just berserk. He would summons me into his office, tear up a statement I'd made. He'd have all of his big brass standing there, and he would literally scream and shout. All security policemen screamed and shout, but he was particularly wild. And he was like, of course, he didn't even seem on top of it. One of the problems that he had with the white left was that we knew him very well. From protests on campus, he was one of the lead security policemen who had come onto campus to arrest us, and he saw us as the devil incarnate. He hated the white left. And on one occasion he'd come up to arrest the SRC president, and the students blocked the student union building. And they grabbed hold of Conrad and they threw him down the stairs. And Conrad says he broke his back. And he used to remind me of that all the time.
Was it a Wits?
At Wits. And he had I can only describe it as a pathological hatred of the white left. He was also, in the period of time that I was in detention, end of 81, beginning of 82, a massive split occurred in the Nationalist Party between the so-called verlichters and the extreme right wing. And the security police were divided themselves between those who supported the Nationalists and those who were supporting the Conservatives. And Conrad very clearly put him in the far right-wing camp. They were talking about it all the time. He later joined the AVB, the Afrikaans Weerstand. So he was a person of extreme right-wing views, extreme volatility, and not a measured man at all.
And did he ever boast to you about the monitoring that you were receiving?
Yes. He would say, we know everything about what you said to Rob Adam. We put listening devices under your bench, under the bench in the Oval Park where you spoke. And, you know, he was bragging about how much, they had monitored us.
And talking about bragging, did he make brags about the big trials that they were going to have?
Yes. He was jubilant. He'd completely misread this close comrades document. I mean, it was unbelievable. The security police, and particularly him, believed that they had cracked the ANC political underground. Never mind the fact that most of these people are white. I mean, the ANC's political underground is not going to be white only. And he was bragging to me. He said, we're going to bring you in truckloads to the court like the treason trial, because all of you are going to go to jail. They thought that they had uncovered the major ANC network. It was a foolish assumption that they made, and fatal for some people.
So, following your arrest, did it quickly come to your attention that others were being arrested as well?
When I was in the car, on the two-way radios, I heard that the security policeman was speaking to other security policemen, that they had gone to Alan Fine's house, and he was not there. So they hadn't yet arrested them. When I got to John Foster Square, I was not taken to the cells. I was taken straight to the 10th floor. I saw Rob Adam in chains around his ankles and his wrists in the passageway. And I can't remember exactly who else I saw. I know Barbara Klukman had been arrested, because she was arrested with me. But quite early on in that detention, someone had left a Rand Daily Mail which had the names of people who'd been arrested. We were the first wave of arrests. I forget how many were arrested. I think there were about 8 of us or so. But people were arrested in waves thereafter.
And because you were aware, at least, from overhearing the two-way radio in the police vehicle, that they were looking for Alan Fine, were you able to take any precautionary measures?
Well, my lord, I had to confront the fact that the security police had this document. And there were 4 people in particular who I had named as being under discipline. The others I weren't worried about, because they were not mentioned as being under discipline. Now, how was I going to protect them as best as possible in the most plausible way? It was a completely terrible situation to be put in. Fortunately, with Alan Fine, Alan Fine and I, because we were the only 2 who knew of each other working under the Botswana network, we had had discussions about what would happen if one of us were arrested or if both of us were arrested. And Alan Fine, who'd been arrested before, had said to me, Barbara, I cannot play heroics. I've been tortured before. If I'm arrested, I will disclose that I'm working through Botswana. But we came to an agreement, and it was actually a true arrangement. I was working more through Marius Squirn, who was in the ANC, and he was working through Jeanette Curtis, and she was working more with SACTU, the South African Congress of Trade Unions. SACTU, as you know, was not banned. It was not illegal to be a member or to have any association with SACTU, whereas with the ANC, it was illegal. And we had agreed that we would stay firm because it was true. He was working in a trade union. He was doing trade union work. I was doing a far wider range of work under the ANC. So both of us stayed with the story that he was SACTU and I was ANC. But knowing that he had not been arrested, I thought I would try and give him a couple of days respite to see if he could not get out of the country, because if he knew I was arrested, he could get out of the country. So I would not admit to how I knew that Alan Fine was under discipline. I cooked up vague stories, and they had other people that they wanted to know about and everything, and quite frankly, my lord, I spun stories. I pretended to be stupid. I cried a lot. I was genuinely emotionally thing, but I was also trying to distract them to give me as much time as possible before I would make a statement about Anna. And they were taken in by that. So for 3 days or so, I was kept upstairs in John Ford's, on the 10th floor, and they were interrogating me non-stop, but they brought in a camper bed, which I slept on at night. And finally, I pretended to reveal the name of a person that they wanted, who wasn't on this list. And I pretended to break down, and they thought I was now on their side, that they'd broken me, and they now could get any information, whatever that they wanted out of me. I was terrified because I knew when they found out that I had spun them along, I'd be in real trouble. But I just wanted to give Alan that time.
Lord, it's now approximately 11:20. Should we take another show? How's it
Yes.
As the court pleases. Ms. Hogan, just before tea time, you had commenced giving an account of the interrogation and how you attempted to protect Alan Fine and others, and how you had strung along the security branch at that time. Can you give an indication, time-wise, approximately how long were you able to string them along?
Must have been about 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days?
I'd given a name of a person who they wanted to arrest, and I knew that person was abroad. When they went to arrest him, it was apparent that I'd all known that he was abroad.
And then you indicate in your affidavit that they were keeping you on the 10th floor for extensive periods of time. Again, how long were they keeping you on the 10th floor without taking you back to your cell?
Oh, during which period?
During the period shortly after your...
That was the 2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Was it day and night?
Yes. They had a camper bed, which they allowed me to sleep on in an office. And I didn't go down to my cell.
So what I mean is the detention take place right through the night or day and night? The interrogation.
No, the interrogation didn't go on through the night.
Were you, during those 2 or 3 days, suffering from any sleep deprivation?
No. I obviously wasn't sleeping well, but they weren't depriving me of sleep.
I see. So, what did you surmise the reason why they were keeping you on the 10th floor and not letting you return to your cell?
My surmise was that they were worried that I would commit suicide. And they were keeping me up there as a preventative measure because they weren't pushing me hard, you know. During the night, they weren't depriving me of sleep at night.
Ms. Hogan, you say in your recent affidavit that the period of detention, your interrogation, your different experiences are set out in the other exhibits, the exhibits that are put up in the first inquest. And so we're going to have to also look time to time at those exhibits. And I will be asking you to recall some of your experiences. I must apologize in advance because some of these experiences are of a traumatic nature. I also recognize that we are going back some 38 years, and we don't expect you to recall everything with the greatest of precision, but nonetheless we are assisted by the fact that you had made out some written affidavits at that time, one signed, one unsigned. So if we could turn to the signed affidavit, my lord, that's Exhibit B 4.2.1. You indicate in paragraph 5 of that affidavit that during the first month of your detention, you were being interrogated on a daily basis. Can you indicate to the court which police officers were involved in your interrogation at that time?
Warrant Officer Dietlefs, Warrant Officer Prince. There was a railways policeman, I forget, van der Merwe, I think, who was there. And Major Cronwright would intervene. Captain Struvik also came in for bouts of interrogation. That's who I recall at the moment.
That's fine, thank you. And my Lord, for the record, and the witness refers to Dietlefs, that's Warrant Officer Nicolaas Johannes Dietlefs. And he did make out an affidavit in the first inquest, that's a B8.46. And he also testified. His testimony is at A6.3. The reference to Warrant Officer Prince is Detective Warrant Officer Lawrence Charles Philip Prince. His testimony is at A1.3.7. Ms. Hogan, you indicated that at that point in time you were not physically assaulted, but nonetheless you suffered some abuse. Can you describe the nature of the abuse at that time?
My Lord, after they realized that I had not been completely forthcoming in the first couple of days, they became incredibly aggressive. So interrogation was a lot of the time highly aggressive, shouting, stamping. I would be handcuffed to a chair, handcuffed to a heater, but not personally assaulted. I was being interrogated about various people, some of whom were on this list, but they were also wanting me to write about what I was doing in the country, and I'd write a statement, and then they'd tear it up and say it wasn't good enough, and I'd write another statement, and they'd scream and shout and perform, and it just went on and on like that. It was, and it became apparent to me, well, that's how I interpreted it, that they were not used to interrogating people who were not linked to Umkhonto weSizwe. Acts of Umkhonto weSizwe are definable. You took a limpet mine there, or you went there, or you fetched arms there. It's very, very definable. When you're talking about political work, it's much more diffuse. And it was my opinion that they were actually, they just could not grasp what they were dealing with. And that was very alarming, because you needed someone who could actually look at what's before you and estimate the value of the information that you were given. My second problem was that they had before them a document, which is the first document that I wrote believing it was going to the ANC, in which I had spelled out the political work that I'd done, in which I had said, quite frankly, the work that I'd done for the ANC was less than, was much less significant in my life at that stage than the ordinary political work around organization and mobilization that I was doing. And they had a full record, and I kept on saying to them, I believed this document was going to the ANC. Would I lie to the ANC? Because they kept on insinuating that I wasn't telling them everything. And I began to believe very seriously that they thought I was in Umkhonto weSizwe networks, and that I was concealing that. And, it just became quite terrifying to see how people didn't know how to interrogate. And I'm not saying it flippantly, but they weren't on top of the game.
However, you do indicate that matters took a turn for the worse. 22nd October 1981, because you state that on that day you were severely assaulted by the security branch on the 10th floor. Can you explain to the court who was involved in these assaults and describe the assaults in question?
It was principally Warrant Officer Prince and to a lesser extent Warrant Officer Detlefs. They just came in, had me handcuffed, started screaming and shouting, telling me that I wasn't cooperating, and started shouting questions I'd answer, they wouldn't listen. And Prince started hitting me on my back, across my face, for quite a period of time. I started bleeding internally, and at about 9 o'clock they took me back to my cell.
If we can just unpack some of the other acts of abuse. Were you handcuffed at that period?
I was handcuffed to a chair, yes. Detlefs threatened me with electrocution. He went and fetched a cable. I can't remember exactly now, it's probably in my report here. And asked them to fetch a wet towel. But they never shocked me.
Yes, indeed. In paragraph 5.4, you mentioned that this cable or cord was from the electric kettle.
Yes, that's right.
So you say that the interrogation continued until approximately 9 p.m. When they started?
The assaults started later in the morning. I was there in the thing. Wait, I just need to refer because it's some time ago.
If I can assist, Your Lord. So you mentioned that you were taken from your cells to the 10th floor at the usual time. What was the usual time?
I think it must have been around about 9 o'clock or so.
That's 9 a.m. In the morning. And do you recall approximately what time that the interrogation began?
It was after. It began in the morning. Then they started assaulting me in the afternoon. But I was not assaulted during the evening.
Okay.
So it was mainly in the first part of the afternoon.
And during those assaults, you indicated that Warrant Officer Prince was slapping you across the face. And in your affidavit, you seem to be saying that he made a special point of hitting you at a particular place on the face.
Well,
Your ears.
yes, my ears were one of the areas that he did hit.
What?
He was hitting me on my head, across my face. He was hitting me on my back. He had a ring on, which also was particularly sore.
And while he was hitting you across your face and ears, did he make a particular threat?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. If it's in the affidavit, I'm sorry.
Yes, so he according to your affidavit 5.3, while doing so, he said he would break your eardrums.
Yes, and then later, and then later on, I had to see a doctor about my ears.
I see. And did Warrant Officer Detlefs also strike you?
He struck me from across the table. I only recall one strike.
And was that across your face?
Hard. It wasn't slaps, it was hard hits.
And then you mentioned that at approximately 7 p.m. Warrant Officer Detlefs made this play of getting an electrical cord from a kettle, but that it just appeared to be a form of intimidation because you were not actually electrocuted. He also fetched a wet cloth. What was that about?
That was seemed to be.
And you also mentioned that Warrant Officer Prince indicated that he took some form of enjoyment in police officers who would come into the interrogation room at various times. What were they doing there?
Just coming to witness what was happening. There were two women security police officers who'd been with me right from the start. And when the assault started, they were told to leave the room. And they were pretty traumatized.
Were they black or white?
They were traumatized.
Were they black or white?
They were white.
So you do list the individuals who were coming in at different times, in paragraph 5.6 of your signed affidavit.
That's Warrant Officer van der Merwe. He was from the Railways Police. Van Aswegen, I don't recall anymore. Warrant Officer Pinaar was the white security police woman. Sergeant Kutsi was, if I'm not mistaken, was a white police woman. A Constable Moonenberg, there was a third one, yes. She had joined later, as I understand it, a policewoman.
And then there was a Lieutenant van Aswegen.
I can't remember that. No, I'm sorry, my lord.
The individuals who were interrogating you and at times assaulting you, in particular Warrant Officer Prince and Warrant Officer Detlefs, did they introduce themselves to you? Did they identify themselves?
Oh, yes, right from the start. They had introduced themselves.
And then the various other officers that you would interact with, did they also introduce themselves?
No, there were periods where I didn't know who the person was.
Meaning that you only came to know who they were at a later stage?
You know, there were so many security police women there that I might come to know some of them and others not, to know who they were.
Right. So, for example, the individuals who you identified in paragraph 5.6, would your legal team at the time have assisted you in identifying who those officers might have been?
No.
Now, on the very next day, so that was the day after this vicious assault on you, you were taken to Dr. Norman Jacobson, the district surgeon. Was that at your request?
No, I was told by Detlefs that they had overlooked the fact that I was due to go to the district surgeon that particular day. And I was taken there.
So it was a
Routine.
scheduled visit.
It was a scheduled visit.
And who accompanied you?
Detlefs accompanied me, and I can't remember who was the driver in the car.
And according to your statement, Constable Mullenberg.
Yes, she was the security. You know, there was I always had to be in the presence of a woman security police woman. So they didn't participate in the interrogations at all. They were just there all the time and accompanied me to cells and whatever.
And did Warrant Officer Detlefs issue any kind of warning to you before you met with the district surgeon?
Warrant Officer Detlefs told me that if I told the doctor that I'd been assaulted, they would later he said, you know the mines? And I said, yes. He said, we will take you there and we will kill you. And you will disappear and no one will know what happened to you. He also said to me when he saw me the next morning, he said to me, you bruise very easily. So he knew that I was going to the doctor with visual bruises.
And did he suggest what you should say to the doctor?
No.
In your statement, you allege that Warrant Officer Detlefs said you should explain the bruises away by the fact that you do bruise easily.
Yes, he said, you bruise easily.
And what was Dr. Jacobson's reaction to the injuries?
Well, when I walked into Jacobson's consulting room, Detlefs walked in behind me. And I said to Dr. Jacobson, I don't want him here. And Jacobson told him to get out. And then Dr. Jacobson said to me, what the hell has happened to you? And I just started crying because I was in a predicament. I thought if I said that I was assaulted, when I returned, I would be worse assaulted because I'd already been threatened. So I didn't answer him directly. So then he immediately started examining me. I had a very high, my blood pressure was extremely high and I had to have an injection to bring it down and various other things.
Was it apparent to you that Dr. Jacobson was aware or surmised that you had been assaulted?
Yes, he asked me if I'd been assaulted.
And your response?
I said no, but in such an ineffectual way.
And in your statement, you indicate that during that time you were in a hysterical state. Perhaps you could just describe what you meant by that.
I wasn't shouting or anything like that, but I was petrified beyond being petrified. I feared for my life. I'd been under constant interrogation for over a month. Hostile, terrible interrogation. I was assaulted the day before. I honestly didn't know what was going to happen to me the next day. I was just in a panic-stricken, beside myself.
So Dr. Jacobson prescribed certain treatment, and you then saw him again shortly thereafter?
Dr. Jacobson prescribed me treatment, and then I think it was a Friday I went there. Then he He said that the security police had to bring me, I think, on the Monday and then later on a Thursday or something like that. And he told me on that second visit that he had phoned security police headquarters in Pretoria and lodged a complaint about my treatment, and had said that he insisted that this kind of interrogation stop and that he wanted to see me for those next couple of days. And then when I saw him for the last time, he made an appointment for me to see him in 10 days' time.
So it's at this point, Ms. Hogan, that we have to start jumping between the exhibits because certain information is reflected in the signed statement and other information is reflected in the unsigned statement. I wish to deal with what transpired on the 26th of October 1981. And if you now look at your unsigned statement of paragraph 7, you indicate that immediately after you had seen the doctor, that would be Dr. Jacobson, you were taken up to the 10th floor, where you were interrogated intensively. Mm-hmm. And you described to the court who was involved in that intensive interrogation.
Dietlers was there, Prince was there, and Martin Nordie. I think it was Captain Nordie from the Eastern Cape. He had recently come up from the Eastern Cape and had been one of the people who had interrogated, but he hadn't been aggressive or anything. I had the sense that he was more on top of his job. But on that occasion, I came back from the doctor, and they started screaming at me and saying, okay, the doctor's not going to see you for some time now. Now we're going to deal with you. So screaming, shouting, you're not cooperating, you're not giving us the information we need, da-da-da-da-da. And I was later taken back to my cell.
So the screaming and shouting, was that by all the officers involved in that interrogation?
I remember Nordie. I would have to go back. I remember Nordie screaming and shouting and was quite shocked because that was not normally his style.
And you also indicated in your unsigned statement that Captain Olivier was present.
Yes, he was also from the security police from East London. They were security policemen who were involved with the trade union that I had visited down in the Eastern Cape. And, you know, they were just telling me, you're not cooperating, you're not giving us what we want, we're going to deal with you.
So did that interrogation last all day? Can you remember the length?
I can't remember the length. I came back from the doctor, and that must have been... No, I can't remember the length, but I was taken back in that evening.
That evening. So we're at least referring to several hours.
Mm.
And can you describe the state you were in at the time you were taken back to your cell?
My Lord, I was completely helpless. And just didn't see my way clear of how I would see my way through this, and I tried to commit suicide. I was in a cell where I was not allowed the things that you would commit suicide with. It was kept very bare, but I managed to steal some tablets that had been prescribed, I think by Dr. Jacobson to me, Valium, some Sindol. It was tablets for bruising and for other things. I was desperate. I wanted to kill myself. I saw no way of my getting out of that situation because I knew of many people who died in detention. I had friends who'd been tortured very badly at John Foster Square. I knew what they were capable of, and I just saw myself being tortured to death for information I simply could not provide. So it became anything that would kill me. I tried to sharpen the edge of my toothpaste. I tried all sorts of things. I did not want to hang myself because I just didn't have the knowledge of how to hang myself. Eventually, I took all the tablets. I think it was several Valium and a whole packet of Sindol or whatever it was. And I lay down, and I had a dressing gown cord which they had overlooked, and I tied it very tightly around my neck so I was virtually suffocating. And then I must have passed out.
So before we proceed, prior to that, did you attempt to pour water down your
nostrils? I was desperate. I would, anything that would have killed me. I just wanted to die.
And then you also mentioned that you had attempted to slash your wrist, but you couldn't find a sharp enough instrument. But you did say in your unsigned statement that you found in your mattress a copper rod about as thick as a pencil. What was that doing there?
I have no idea. Prisoners often hid things in the mattresses. They were filthy, dirty foam mattresses. And some prisoner must have hid it there for some reason.
And then you indicated that you took the tablets that you had with you that had been prescribed. There were 2 Mogadons, 3 or 4 Valiums, and about 17 Sindols. You also mentioned at paragraph 13 of your unsigned affidavit that you squeezed half a tube of anesthetic cream down your throat. You attempted to tie this dressing gown cord around your neck, and you then passed out. Do you recall waking up or gaining consciousness?
I woke up the next morning, my lord, and I must have, in the night, ripped that cord or pulled that cord off because it was lying next to me. Because probably I was suffocating.
So then the next morning, this is now the 27th of October 1981, you obviously were feeling poorly. Did you make a request to see the doctor?
Is it in my statement that I did? Yes.
Indeed you did.
I might have, because the thing that also terrified me was they were bragging that they'd taken me out of the surveillance of the doctor, that they could do anything with me.
And according to your statement, you had made the request to Lieutenant Mordia. And what was his response?
This is hard stuff.
At that point, you indicate that he became quite sarcastic.
He might have. I'm sorry, some of this is, I can't, but it's in my statement. And this statement was taken within months, within 2 2 months, 3 months of 2 months of this happening.
Yes, indeed.
So it was
Okay,
very
we
accurate.
we
yes.
will have reference to your statement. But you were on the right track because...
Yes, I remember that now. Nadir said, it was Nadir who said to me, "Doctor, I'm a doctor. Look at me, I've got a white suit on." He had a white safari suit on. So they were being very sarcastic. I never indicated to them that I tried to commit suicide.
You then further indicate that later that morning, Major Conrad entered the interrogation room, indicating that he was very dissatisfied with you and that he was going to take certain action. Do you recall what action was then taken?
What they then did were, my lord, they discharged me from John Foster Square, and they took me to Vereeniging police cells for further interrogation. And they bragged about it. And they said the reason why they took me to Vereeniging was to take me out of the jurisdiction, the regional jurisdiction of the district surgeon who had seen me in Johannesburg, and that I would then fall under a different district surgeon.
Indeed, you then indicate that at Vereeniging, it's not clear whether it was on the 27th of October or shortly thereafter, you got to see a magistrate by the name of Killian, Mr. Killian. Was that a scheduled visit, or was that your request?
No, for some reason, this magistrate arrived. I never saw a magistrate, I think, during the time that I was at John Foster. And it was, suddenly this Killian arrived at Vereeniging.
Vereeniging police station?
Yes.
And did he indicate to you that he could only offer you very limited assistance?
Yes, I said that I'd been assaulted and I wanted to make a statement. And he said that he could not take a statement because the assault took place in Johannesburg and not in Vereeniging.
To be clear, at least in the signed statement, Mr. Killian pointed out that he was only able to deal with what happened to you at Vereeniging.
At John Foster's.
Well, according to paragraph 7 of your signed statement, you said he was only permitted to take statements from you concerning my conditions at
Vereeniging, and not at John Foster.
Not at
Yes.
John Foster. So according to that statement, you didn't mention your assault at John Foster Square.
He would not take a statement about the assaults from John Foster.
But at that time, you were still in a state of fear of what could transpire if you made such complaints.
But I felt I needed some way to protect myself.
Right. And during that interview with Mr. Killian, do you recall Warrant Officer Dietlefs walking into your cell?
In the same way that Dietlefs followed me into the doctor's room, he followed me into that interview with Killian.
And what transpired once Dietlefs was present in the cell with you and the magistrate?
I think the interview came to a close. I can't exactly remember what transpired.
Did Magistrate Killian object at any point to the presence of Warrant Officer Dietlefs?
No.
You do say in your statement at the bottom of paragraph 7 that at the time Mr. Killian came to see me, I was told by Warrant Officer Dietlefs, Lieutenant Mordier and Captain Alafia that they would continue to assault me regardless of anything.
Yes. Not in his presence. But they said they would, they don't care about inspectors or whatever. They'll continue the insult.
So at least in relation to the magistrate Killian, they didn't seem to have any concerns that there would be any repercussions.
Absolutely.
Do you recall how long you were held approximately at Vereeniging police station?
I don't recall the exact time. I think it was towards mid-November or so. So I was there for about 2 or 3 weeks, I think.
Okay. And you do relate an incident that took place while you were at Vereeniging on Saturday, 14 November 1981. Involving Captain Strubek, Warrant Officer Deercliffs, Captain Olivier and Lieutenant Nordia. And you say they appear to be in a bad mood. Can you explain why?
They came in an extremely bad mood and said they had just gone to arrest Gavin Anderson and discovered that he'd left the country. My Lord Gavin Anderson was one of the people that I had right at the top. And when I was interrogated about how I knew he was under discipline, I had revived the story that they already knew about, that he had met with SABC in earlier years in Botswana and had nothing further to do with them. So I said that was the basis that I knew that he was, had links to SABC, but I thought he probably still had links. So they were furious, and then Gavin Anderson was released 2 weeks after we were arrested, which, given the status in the close comrades document, it's just, it just shows that they did not understand what they were dealing with. They released someone who was central to the case, and so they were furious with me because this was once again an occasion when I had not cooperated and I had protected Gavin. That was their view.
So they were in a foul mood, and you indicate that that as far as the statement that you had completed, they were going to burn it. Detlef then said you had to go sit under the table. Can you explain the circumstances and why you believe you maybe did that?
They were trying to humiliate me. So go sit under the table, then they'd walk round and someone would kick me under the table.
And you also indicate at paragraph 17 of your unsigned statement that you were actually physically assaulted at that time.
Yes.
Can you describe to the court the nature of that assault and who was involved?
It was mainly Captain Struvik. He also hit me across the face, and he took a piece of wood and hit me on my hip. That was on that occasion.
But if you just pause there, you also indicate that he was striking you in your face with a newspaper. How would he do that?
He'd rolled it up. I don't know if there was something inside it. I don't know if that meant that you don't bruise that easily. I honestly don't know why he was doing that.
And I don't like to put this question, but was it painful being struck with a rolled up newspaper?
Yes, it was.
And he also struck you with a piece of wood, you say.
Yeah.
Can you describe this piece of wood, perhaps?
It just happened to be a spare piece of wood that was in the office, and he picked it up and he walloped me.
And how big or long was this piece of wood?
I don't recall it was about that long.
30 centimeters?
I would say 30 centimeters. And did they raise Alan Fine in that interrogation?
I would have to remember that.
So they, just to assist you,
Yes.
did they suggest that Alan Fine was dead?
Yeah, oh, sorry,
and if
yes.
so,
Ja, no, then Struwweg then said to me in a very sneering way, and by the way, Alan Fine is dead. He wasn't dead, but he was dead.
And at that time you said that after that very long day of interrogation, you were exhausted and dispirited, and you again contemplated suicide. But you're simply too exhausted to go through with it. And then, Ms. Hogan, your ordeal continued because the next day, Sunday, the 15th of November, 1981, you in fact say that these individuals took you to an office in the Vereeniging police station and subjected you to the most intensive interrogation session that I'd had. Can you indicate who was involved in that interrogation?
Major Aubrey, he come from Pretoria. Lieutenant Prince, Dietlers, was also Nodie and Olivier. And this Van Aswegen, I still don't remember the Van Aswegen, but I rely on my younger memory.
Right. Just to point out that in paragraph 18, and I'm not saying that one officer Dietlers wasn't there, but he isn't listed in the names you provided at that time. So those individuals were Major Aubrey, Lieutenant Van Aswegen, Warrant Officer Prince, and Constable Judy Knight. They were the ones that escorted you to Vereeniging police station.
Yes.
Were those the exact same individuals who were involved in the interrogation, or were there others present as well?
They took shifts because I was kept awake. So the people that I mentioned, they were all taking shifts.
Yes, and you make that point in paragraph 19 of that affidavit. You describe them as successive 3-hour shifts of 3 security policemen. So are you saying there were 3 security policemen present during the 3-hour duration, and then a fresh 3 would come in after the 3 hours? So at that time, you seem to be suggesting that the first 3 were Aubrey, Prince, and Van Aswegen, and that these individuals would then rest and sleep on stretchers in the next door office. But indeed, that night you were not allowed to sleep. You were kept up the entire night.
All the time.
And while you were being kept up, were you being interrogated? The very next morning, you indicate that the next 3 came in at approximately 0800 on the morning of 16 November. That was Lieutenant Nadir, Captain Olivier, and Warrant Officer Dietlers. Do you recall anything in particular about that interrogation?
On the 16th of November.
The morning of the 16th of November.
That was
It was a Monday.
a Monday. I'm not sure what you're referring to on that. Oh yes, well that morning at noon I was allowed to go back to my cell.
But in that interrogation involving Nadir, Olivier, and Dietlers, do you recall any abuse of any nature?
No,
And if you can't, that's also
it's
fine.
fine. Yeah, sorry.
So when you returned to your cells, you discovered that Magistrate Killian was there. What transpired?
I just said nothing to him. I was so exhausted, and so there was no point.
You were simply too exhausted to...
And I mean, he was a joke.
Before, let me find out, during the interrogation from the 15th to 16th, were you seated or did you need to stand?
I was seated.
You were seated. Through the night.
So in January of 1982, you eventually got to see the Inspector of Detainees, Mr. Mouton. It seemed as if, in fact, at that point in time, you did have the wherewithal to set out to Mr. Mouton that you had been abused.
Yes, I had been taken back after being in Vereniging, and I was taken back to John Foster Square. And then Mouton came, the inspector, and I laid a complaint.
And you recall the nature of the complaint?
I specified what had happened to me on both occasions.
Did you ask him whether you were entitled to lay criminal charges?
Yes. And he said I could lay criminal charges. And I asked him, I think I remember asking if they could further assault me on the basis of laying a charge.
And what was his response?
I can't remember what his response was, but I wanted to lay a charge.
Okay, all right. We will return to the history of those charges shortly. While you were being questioned during your period of detention, you indicated that there was general pressure on you to implicate as many people as possible. But in particular, there was specific pressure to implicate certain individuals. Do you recall who those individuals were?
Aggett, Neil Aggett, they didn't put me under pressure about Gavin Anderson because they'd released him. They said to me they considered him to be mad. So Maltz was a house, they said, because he wouldn't eat meat. He was a vegetarian and he wouldn't eat meat.
Who would have thought that vegetarianism would help you escape that kind
The
of
clutches
pressure?
of the security police.
If we can focus on Neil Aggett in particular, can you describe what it is they were asking about Neil Aggett, and they were trying to get you to implicate him in any way?
They were interested not only in Neil but in Liz. And let me say that the person who was most interested was Lieutenant Whitehead, who was not part of my interrogation team, but every now and again he would come in. And it was weird stuff. It wasn't, stuff about what are these people doing politically or something. It was like, what is their relationship like? The relationship between Liz and Neil. And who is the pence in the relationship? And it actually, I became very uncomfortable because I got the impression that Whitehead had a morbid, and I mean, I really felt it at the time, a morbid interest in Liz and Neil.
When you say morbid,
It was
unhealthy,
like,
or-
it was unhealthy. You know, it was wanting to know about their private life. It was icky stuff. I can't put it more than that, but I felt incredibly the others would scream and shout and say, oh, we know he's a communist, and this one's a this and that one's a that. But Whitehead came with this kind of like, it was like he was personally involved, that he had an inner personal interest there. I can only put it in that way.
And Lieutenant van Aswegen, did he also have a similar interest?
You see, I don't remember this van Aswegen. I'd have to see a photograph. I'm sorry, it's in my statement, but I just can't recall at the moment. Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. Did they ask questions about the prison lifestyle of Liz Floyd and Neil Aggett?
Yes, you know, Whitehead would say to me, he can't understand this. Here are these two doctors. They could go and make a good life for themselves. Now, why are they working in black hospitals and government service? They earn nothing. And that, you know, it was so, you know, what kind of security policeman makes those kinds of comments? You know, commenting about lifestyle. When they knew the white left generally were poor. You know, we weren't living in the lap of luxury. We lived in communes. We were all living from hand to mouth. So, you know, Liz and Neil were not the exception. But it was like, you know, these people are crazy. You know, he was implying that they didn't know what was good for them.
And did they have questions about Neil's political views and any political association?
Yes, they wanted to know was he was in the ANC and everything like that. And I said, Neil had said to me that he does not want to be in a relationship with the ANC in exile because it would jeopardize his internal work. I repeated that 100,000 times. I said, and I said I only had a relationship with Neil above ground, and I really believed that Neil was not connected to the ANC underground.
Did you get the impression that they were believing you or not?
You know, this is where, my Lord, when I talk about, when I think the nature of the interrogation was not being driven by intelligence in the sense of that they were looking for information that was necessary. Because they had before them a document which said I only had a relationship with Neil above ground, you know, not in any capacity. This document had been sent to the ANC as I understood it. I would not lie to the ANC. Yet, one of the great pressures on me was to say that Neil was a member of the ANC. And I could not say that. And, you know, the more and more I used this document, and I said to him, even to the ANC, I said, he was not a member. They were still trying to pressurize me, and that's, I think, what caused, and with other people as well, what caused me my greatest distress is that they were trying to force me to say that people who I had no idea what their affiliations were indeed members of the ANC.
when you refer to this document, were you referring to the
Close comrades, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you, at some point, decided to lay criminal charges against certain officers. Can you indicate which officers you laid criminal complaints against and how it was you came to lay those charges?
Those charges, I reported the charges to Inspector Mouton. The prosecuting authorities then charged, I know it was Dietlefs and Prince, and I'm not sure who else was charged.
I think it was just those two.
Yeah. And the case came to court in July that year.
And what was the outcome of that case?
Well, the district surgeon, Dr. Jacobson, gave evidence at that trial and said, in his opinion, I had been assaulted. I showed all kinds of anomalies, like they said the reason for my bruising was that I'd fallen against the windowsill at John Foster Square in my cell. I'd slipped and fallen. And when we went on an in loco inspection, I showed the magistrate that I was too short to even reach the windowsill. I equally showed the magistrate the place where the kettle was, where Dietlefs and the chair that I'd been sitting on. But regardless of that, the magistrate found them not guilty of assault.
And so both Dietlefs and Prince were acquitted?
They were acquitted, yes.
You mentioned in your recent affidavit that you signed in January this year that although you spent some 6 months in solitary confinement, you attempted to keep contact or monitor what was happening to the other detainees. And how would you do that?
When I was at John Foster Square, there was a passageway in which some of the detainees were brought in, that if I stood on the pipes of my cell, I could see them coming through. And I tried to watch to see in what state people were coming through. Not many came through that way. I also, when I signed for food, we had, when they bring you food in the cell, you had to sign for it. I always looked to see who else had signed, because my understanding was that often the interrogations, the torture, took place at night when people were kept away from their cells and when most people weren't at John Foster Square. I could probably be wrong, but that was... So I was checking to see who was being booked back into their cells at night.
And were you concerned in relation to those who hadn't returned at night?
I can't... Of course I would have been concerned, but I can't even remember names now at that time of who returned and who didn't return.
You also mentioned in your affidavit that certain items were kept away from you, such as shoelaces and belts.
Yeah.
You already mentioned the fact that they overlooked your dressing gown and cord. Do you recall how often the cells were searched?
Regularly. The security police women would do those searches. And, there was nothing in those cells.
Were you allowed to keep any books with you?
I was not allowed books when I was at John Foster Square at all. Only the Bible.
I see. Although I do recall that at some point...
Later on, when my interrogation was finished, I was moved out of John Foster Square and taken to Heidelberg police cells. And I I was then allowed 2 books a week.
Just 2. You did mention, at least in your affidavit, that at some point when Conrad was unhappy with progress, that he confiscated some items, including a Rubik's Cube.
I had a Rubik's Cube and a pack of playing cards which they had allowed me. And that was confiscated. They used to do things like, when I first came to John Vorster Square, I was put in a cell that was filthy dirty and I slept on a sisal mat. And my family, who were receiving my clothes, noticed how dirty my clothes were. And so they raised that as an issue. Then they'd bring in a bed, and then when they said I wasn't cooperating, they'd remove the bed. So after I was assaulted, the bed was removed. They played all of those kind of games, but I was only allowed books after interrogation.
And in the female section of second floor cells at John Vorster, were you required to clean your cell?
No.
I understand that you had some limited interaction with Neil Aggett while at John Vorster Square.
Yes.
Can you describe that?
I was taken to the Eastern Cape just before Christmas in 1981 for further interrogation down in East London. And I was returned in early January. And thereafter I was moved to Heidelberg police cells. And I remember as they were processing my discharge from John Vorster Square, Neil came through. It's a kind of a reception room area or where they process things. And he saw me and he gave me a big smile and he did an Amandla salute to me. And I noticed that his shirt was torn. And that was the last time I saw him.
Do you recall approximately where on the shirt was torn?
You know, as I remember, it was somewhere here around cuff, around this area here.
Right, so the underside of his arm. And then you indicate that his escort carried him off. Was that the last time you saw him alive?
Yes.
And can you explain to the court how it was that you got to hear of Neil's death?
I was being kept at the Heidelberg police cells and had no contact with anyone. And then one morning Dietlefs arrived, and I forget who the other policeman was, and said that I have to go to John Vorster Square. And
You had to go there.
yeah, they were taking me to John Vorster Square. And they'd been talking in the car about the Food and Canning Workers Union, which is a union that Neil worked for. And I didn't understand, what it was all about, but they were focusing on the union. And then a newspaper van drove past us, and it had a headline, on the sides where it had the day's headline.
Poster.
A poster. It had a poster which said, "Detainee's death creates a funeral." And I said to Dietlef, "Oh bastard, who've you killed?" And he turned around to me and he said, "It's someone you're close to." And I immediately thought it was Neil because he was the only one that I understood to be from the union, from the Food and Canning Workers Union. And I was taken to John Forster Square, and my sister was there with my parents. And my sister immediately said to me, "Have you heard about Neil?" And they screamed at her and they said she may not speak further.
They being?
I thought it was Detlef's, but I'm not sure. It was a policeman who was sitting in on my meeting with my family.
And on the return drive, did you have to take any action against him?
You know, Detlef's was particularly vicious with me. Well, not vicious in a physical sense, but in a nasty sense. I was obviously in a total state. And my parents were crying, my sister was crying. I was worried about them as well. And they put me in the back of the car and they handcuffed me with my hands behind my back, but in such a way that it really hurt. And it cut into me, and, you know, with every bump of the car. And then Detlef started, my family had bought the 2 books that I was allowed. And Detlef started going through it and he said, "No, this is communistic books," or he said something like that. And it was, you know, it was like a Jane Austen book or something, you know. And he then said he's confiscating it. So I was left with only, after the news of Neil's death, I was left by myself with only 1 book and no one else. And he did it on purpose. It was a viciousness.
And Ms. Hogan, you mentioned that during the early 1990s, you were the Secretary General of the ANC in Gauteng, as well as the liaison officer with the South African Police Service at the time. Did you have one last encounter with Detlef?
Suddenly out of the blue I get a telephone call, and this is like 10 years later. I get a telephone call from a person who introduces himself as Detlef, so it was Detlef's. And he said, "How are you?" And I was just so irritated. And I just said to him, "You've never been concerned about my welfare." And I put the phone down.
Ms. Hogan, is there anything else that you wish to add at this time?
No, I think that's a lot. I'm sorry that some of the stuff I was a bit in between.
I'd like to thank you for your courage and your fortitude in testifying this morning. Lord, I'm
And can I just say that the reopening of the inquest is very painful for virtually everyone sitting here. But it's timely. And I have just spoken of the terrors that I faced. Many people faced worse. And I just want to thank everybody who was involved. And I thank you, Joe, everyone who was involved, who has brought us about. Neil and everyone who died in detention under these terrible circumstances need to have justice, need to be heard and have justice done. Thank you, my Lord.
Certain questions should be noted down so that
Yeah.
some of the council who want to pose questions to you. We start with council.
Well, I see it's almost 1 o'clock. Should we take a lunch break and resume? Are we in his lordship
How
there?
much time does it have? How much time do you have today? I think 3 to 4 o'clock will be sufficient.
My Lord, we're in your hands. We normally adjourn at 4 p.m., but if the court wishes to sit longer, unless my colleagues have objections, we certainly have no objections.
But do you want us to take a lunch break? I'm sure you want us to take a lunch break.
My Lord, it is almost 1 p.m.
I
so
do not want to say that Ms. Hogan is on a flight to Cape Town at 4
No,
o'clock.
no, I'm not.
Okay.
I've changed my flights. Thank you
Okay,
very
thank you
much.
very much. Well, let's take a lunch and then to go on.
You wait, I'm coming back. You give me your questions.
You must give me this.